Hello, I hope you've had a wonderful Palm Sunday celebration so far. Today we're going to look specifically at how the story was told by St. John, which is really quite different than the way Matthew, Mark, and Luke relate their story. The themes are quite different. Now, similar to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John alludes in his passage to a text from the prophet Zechariah in chapter 9. Zechariah chapter 9, it said, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you. Righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, if we look at the context of what's going on in the prophet, according to Zechariah, we get great insight, I think, into where John is trying to go when he quotes that Jesus was in some way fulfilling that prophecy on Palm Sunday. If you go back and look at the full chapter of chapter 9 in the prophet of Zechariah, the first several verses deal with Israel's enemies. Israel's enemies who had caused and inflicted great suffering on Israel down through the centuries. They're named off. Places like Philistia, places like Tyre and Sidon. These various nations that had caused a great deal of suffering for Israel are named. And the prophet declared that those foreign powers would be completely defeated. In fact, almost obliterated. And the idea ultimately is that Israel will be liberated from their suffering. But in addition to that, we have this idea that there would be a remnant of these groups, of these various people groups that would survive. And the remnant of the people groups would become part of Israel. And that the king would ride into Jerusalem, and all these peoples, whether Israelites or a Gentile, a person who's not an Israelite, they would all acknowledge as king the king who rides into Jerusalem. In fact, his reign, the reign of this king, is described in chapter 9. The text says, he will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. Now, when we hear in our modern mind the idea of the enemies of Israel being defeated, perhaps even obliterated in some way, we naturally take great offense. It sounds terribly violent, but we have to understand the way the Israelites would have heard such a text in their original historical context. This is like the Christians in Nigeria being told that Boko Haram was finally destroyed and would never inflict suffering on their people anymore. Or perhaps something like the people of Ukraine being told that Russia will never invade their nation anymore, or tell them what they should do. When Zechariah proclaimed his prophecy, it's something like that the Israelites heard. But as we end up finding as the gospel unfolds, is that Jesus never intended for the Gentiles to be defeated violently anyway. We're going to find that the way that he defeats the powers of darkness, the way he defeats evil and tyranny in our world, isn't actually through a violent uprising, but actually by laying down his life. But I jump ahead of myself a little bit. If we return to John chapter 12, the Bible says there was a great crowd that had come out for the festival. That is, who had come out for the Passover festival. They're in Jerusalem because Passover is coming. And they heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. And so the people took palm branches and they went out to meet him. Now, for you and I to take out palm branches holds no significance whatsoever. But in Jesus' world, palm branches were a symbol of celebrating, but they were also something that you would do to celebrate a king. to celebrate and wave these palm branches and to celebrate Jesus riding into town in this way was to celebrate him as king. In fact, it's quite similar to what happened a couple hundred years before Jesus when Judas Maccabees arrived into Jerusalem after having defeated the Seleucid Empire, or after Antiochus Epiphanes was defeated. So they came out to greet Jesus and they claimed, "Hosanna," which means save us. Their longing, of course, was to be rescued from their Roman oppressors. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," they said, "and blessed is the King of Israel." The symbolism, the meaning of Jesus riding into town that day on a donkey, as we have in the next verse. He found a young donkey and he sat on it and he rode in Jerusalem, not walking like a normal person, but riding on a donkey as if he regarded himself as Jerusalem's rightful king. It is no wonder then that the powers that were in Jerusalem at the time became very anxious when Jesus engaged in this highly symbolic act. Nobody could miss the significance of what he's doing. He sees himself as Israel's rightful king. Indeed, he is riding on a donkey, and he sees himself as the world's rightful king, the king to whom ultimately everyone across the globe, around the globe, would ultimately give their allegiance to. He rode into Jerusalem like he was the king of the world. At first, the text says his disciples did not understand this. It was only after Jesus was glorified. That's a key word for John. A glorification of Jesus ultimately, as we'll remember this Friday, is when Jesus was crucified. But only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things that had been written about him, and that these things had to be done to him. And so the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. And many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. And so the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." And when we hear that expression, the whole world has gone after him, we think it's hyperbole, naturally, but the irony of the statement is that is exactly what is happening, and that is exactly what Jesus intends to ultimately happen. He intends for all the world to go after him. In fact, the text says, and this is what's unique in John's Gospel, in verse 20, now there were some Greeks, some non-Israelites, some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. These are non-Jews who would maybe not be able to completely observe the Passover festival, but yet they are intrigued, they are interested, and they desired to worship the God of Israel. They came up to celebrate the festival, and when they came to Philip, perhaps they felt non-threatened by Philip because his name was the same as Alexander the Great's father's name, Philip. He has a Greek name. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. They said, "Sir, we would like to see Jesus." Do you see what's happening in the story then? The Greeks want to see Jesus. All the world is indeed, representatively, all the world is coming to Jesus. They want to see Jesus. They're beginning to understand Jesus is the world's rightful king. So Philip went to Andrew, Andrew went to Philip, and Philip in turn went to Jesus. And then we don't necessarily have the specific encounter of Jesus in the Greeks, but Jesus then deals specifically with what is going on. The text says, Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Again, in John's Gospel, glorified and crucified are two ways of saying the same thing, and we'll define that very shortly. "Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." Where is life, new life, going to come from? By Jesus being that wheat that falls to the ground and dies. But he knows the outcome of his death will be a plethora of seeds. Indeed, he goes on to say, anyone who loves their life will lose it, and anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. This is something Jesus is soon to model himself. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. And the crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered, and others had said an angel had spoken to him. But Jesus was once again reaffirmed that he is doing exactly what the Father desires for him to do. So Jesus said this voice was for your benefit, not mine. And then he said this, and this is very important for understanding the meaning, the significance of the crucifixion. He said, now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. In just moments, Jesus is going to defeat the real enemy. He's going to drive the real enemy out of Jerusalem. Indeed, out of not just Rome, but drive him out of this world. The prince of this world is soon to be driven out. When Jesus goes to the cross, he battles the powers of darkness, and the powers of darkness will exhaust their powers upon him and be defeated. Indeed, verse 32, Jesus says, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. How will he draw the people to himself? How does he become the world's king? By being lifted up from the earth. Interestingly enough, we could also translate this, when I am exalted from the earth. But for John and for Jesus himself, to be exalted is to be placed on the cross. The throne upon which Jesus intends to sit and rule over the world is the cross. And by being lifted up, exalted on the cross, the outcome is all are drawn to him, and the prince of this world is driven out. And as John makes very clear, he said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. And so, Jesus went on to say, you are going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. And when he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. This is our call even now as we see Jesus lifted up. Our calling, the appropriate response to this story, is to acknowledge that he is the world's rightful king. And when we do that, we become children of light. Indeed, as Jesus brought light into our world, we become children who elucidate our own worlds. When we follow him, and when we acknowledge him as our rightful king. So I want to challenge you today to celebrate Jesus as the world's rightful king. That was the meaning. That's the significance of the people and the palm branches and the donkey that Jesus rode into Jerusalem that day. Jesus is the world's rightful king, and he's riding into Jerusalem so that he can ascend to his throne. Where is his throne? His throne is the cross. And so we revere him and honor him, especially during this holy week. Let us close in prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Amen. God bless you. Go with God.